Hello. So, one of the best episodes of The Big Bang Theory, in my opinion at least, the guys had gone off to a Star Trek convention, and their girlfriends are at home, and they start, these guys there, how do they get so caught up in this childish stuff? But they decide, let's read a comic book and try to figure out what this is all about. So Penny, Bernadette, and Amy all go to the comic book store, decide to buy a Thor comic book, read it, decide, yes, this is the stupidest thing we've ever read, A hammer so heavy that only Thor can pick it up. What's up with that? Well, it's not that the hammer's heavy, it's that it's enchanted, and okay, so only he who is worthy can pick it up, and well, who decides what's worthy? And they start down the road of the geek argument about comic books. And so it ends with them, of course, rereading the comic book and still not understanding why guys like comic books, but at the same time doing everything guys do when they read comic books. Now, presumably, the characters was the first comic book that they had actually read, so they left out some about it. So I am going to continue their conversation on Thor's hammer. Or what potentially could have been their conversation, at least. Now then. To begin with, the comic books and the movies, and, so far as I've seen, for the most part refer to it as either Thor's hammer or the hammer of Thor. I only bring that up because any conversation about Thor's hammer, you're going to have one person come out, it's Mjolnir! And yes, that is the name given to it in Norse mythology. But for the comic book purposes, Thor's hammer is fine. So, acting like someone's insulting Thor or insulting the hammer by not using its proper name is other by itself. That again, it doesn't fall into the geek argument or geek discussion thing as much as the rest of the discussion. But at the same time, there's always that one person who seems to think that you're doing something wrong if you don't say Mjolnir, even though the comic books themselves don't say Mjolnir that often. They do occasionally, but not often. Outside of that, so we get to let's get to this whole thing about who can lift it. Now, they did have the transitive property of if I lift Thor while he's holding the hammer, am I lifting the hammer or not? They covered that. Now, X-Men. You got the Blob, Brotherhood of Mutants. Basically, his mutant power is he cannot be moved if he does not want to. He plants his feet, you can push him all you want, he's not going to move anywhere. Sort of similar to Thor's hammer. Now then, there have been comic books where they've gotten underneath them, tunneled underneath or whatever, lifted the ground underneath, and they've moved him. So, can you do that with Thor's hammer then? Can you... You're not directly touching it, but you're moving it, or I don't know how that works with Blob, but would something similar work with the hammer? Don't know. I don't know if anyone's ever tried that one. Haven't seen a comic book where anyone has tried or not tried that trick. But, that would be a way of moving it. Along those lines, of course, we've got things like, what about the shield ship? Avengers. Did he, when Thor was on the ship, did he carry the hammer with him the whole time? This is something I thought about while I was planning on this. I haven't rewatched the movie to check. I'm probably going to rewatch the movie just to check. While he is on the shield ship, was he holding the hammer the whole time, or did he leave it back in his room or whatever at some point? Again, unless he's actually waving the hammer around, you don't pay attention to does he have it with him or not. Um, so if he doesn't have it, which again, like I said, this is something I got to check on, then who's lifting it? Is the pilot lifting it by the transitory property of lifting Thor's hammer? Or is it just, well, the airship is just, the airship's worthy. It's an inanimate object, so it's not good or evil, it is worthy. Um, Now, along those lines, we got other things. Talked about the Blob. We also have Juggernaut, another mutant. Mutant power is once he gets his momentum going, he can't be stopped. He is unstoppable. Uh, so, first question on this one comes down to Juggernaut versus the Blob. If he were to run into the Blob, would the Blob stop him, or would he push the Blob? And I don't know if that's ever been done. I mean, they're both Brotherhood of Mutants, so they're on the same team, even though their personalities might not go together the whole time. But don't know if they've ever tested that. But then a similar question comes up with Thor's hammer. If Thor's hammer's on the ground and Juggernaut goes running by and grabs it, is the hammer going to stop him? Is he going to hurt his arm? Will he just not get a good grip on it? Will he move the hammer? Reasonable question. I mean, we're talking about, Hulk can't lift it, but Hulk doesn't have this mutant power. Now, we know that the hammer itself is not super heavy, and that it is the enchantment of the hammer that makes it unmovable or makes other people unable to lift it. And we know this basically, Thor's pinned people to the ground by putting the hammer on him. And if the hammer is super heavy, then he would basically be killing some of the people that he did this to. So it's not that the hammer is super heavy, it's just that it's enchanted and you can't lift it if you aren't Thor. So that way Hulk can be stronger than Thor but still can't lift the hammer. So now the question is, does an enchantment outweigh a mutant power or not? Or which trumps which? We can always argue that an enchantment, beats, enchantment trumps mutant power. Okay, so let's look at another mutant power. Supposing I have an electrical mutant power, and not only can I shoot lightning bolts, but you would assume with a power like that I can be resistant to electricity. Doctor Strange shoots a lightning bolt at me. It is a magic lightning bolt because he is a wizard. So, will it hurt me or not? Because enchantment trumps mutant power. Getting off the subject from Thor's hammer, but this is the sort of thing which, these conversations can go down these side roads like that. Now then, weightlifting. If you choose to bench press and you don't have anyone spotting you because you are being foolish, they say if you get the bar on you and you can't lift it, too much weight or you're too tired or whatever, the thing to do, you don't try to put it back on the stand, otherwise it can slip and hurt you. But keep pressure up and just try to slowly roll it down your body. Basically, your basic thing, you're trying to get off your neck, trying to get off your chest. You want to be able to breathe. If you're really lucky, you can actually roll it all the way down, sit up and roll it off your legs, and you'll be fine. Can you do this with Thor's hammer? I mean, he's got you pinned with it. He has the ability to pin you with it. But you're not really lifting it, just that you're not really lifting the barbells. You're just sort of sliding it down your body. Could you get out from under his hammer just by pushing it along? Again, this sort of goes down to, is sliding it along the ground the same as lifting it? Can you do that? Juggernaut might be able to slide it down his body just because all he has to do is get a little momentum going and he can't be stopped. we get into other weird things like, you know, Thor's ability to fly. Thor doesn't fly. He throws his hammer and then lets it drag him along behind him. Um, in the original comic books, he could only go one direction. So, um, you know, or straight line basically, or arc, trajectory. He couldn't change direction in midair. I don't know if he can do that in modern comics. I haven't looked it up. Um, he also has the ability to call his hammer. So, midair, he's being pulled by it. If he wants to stop and change directions, all he has to do is call his hammer. It changes directions and comes back to him. He catches it, then he, I guess, midair swings it around and tries to throw it again. I think he's done that once or twice. So the whole throwing his hammer and having it dragging it behind him, I'm trying to think, would that work with the laws of physics? Put enough force behind it. I mean, basically, it's not that the hammer's carrying him; it's that his own strength. It's the equivalent of jumping. If I can push with my legs long enough to get off the ground, then why can't I throw something with the same force necessary to lift me off the ground? So it's almost a question then, why doesn't he just jump everywhere instead of throwing his hammer around? Because that's the way Stan Lee originated it, I guess. So that's it. I mean, I guess, well, that's not really it. So my next question is, why do geeks have these conversations in the first place? And why, and how did Penny, Bernadette, and Amy get dragged into a conversation like this, even when they were mocking it to begin with? And my answer to that is this comes to basically psychology. And I think there should be a branch of psychology, geek psychology, which looks into this. And as I see it, at least, this is sort of the creative brain versus the logical brain. And so, yes, we want to escape into our fantasy world and we read our comic books, but we want the comic books to make sense. And so, we want at least continuity. We don't want to just making things up randomly, even though people would argue that's what comic books are. They're just fantasy, and yes, but we enjoy the fantasy, but we want the fantasy to make sense. We want continuity. I mean, that's any good writing. If in the last scene of Hamlet, Polonius went walking by, everyone would be like, well, didn't this guy die 3 acts ago? And they would be right, he did. And we'd say it was a bad play because lack of continuity. And so that's, like I said, we have the whole balance between the creative brain and the logical brain. We have the entire just fiction as a general principle that humans like for some reason. So I believe there would actually be a way to study psychology by studying people arguing about comic books, because it is the two sides of our brain arguing against each other, trying to enjoy the fantasy of the comic book, but wanting it to make sense. If anyone does start geek psychology, then use this video to give me the honorary doctorate I deserve, just because I invented it and you're making your thesis based on my idea. That's all I have to say. Have a good day and watch those hammers.